What if someone wants you dead but you live to tell? It's been more than 10 years since the night 10-year-old Krystal Surles had her throat slit after witnessing her friend being murdered. A legendary tale of survival and the power of determination. Krystal Surles, after enduring what seemed like insurmountable odds, not only survived but also faced and brought her assailant to the light of justice. With unwavering courage and relentless determination, she uncovered the truth, proving that nothing is impossible when one has the will and resilience of spirit. It was a Friday evening, and Pam's 2 daughters had stayed at a friend's house overnight. The family was in the midst of moving from Kansas to Texas, and Pam believed it was beneficial for her daughters to make new friends. The relocation was challenging for her young children, so Pam did everything she could to ease the transition for them. In that context, such a decision seemed best. As her daughters spent the night at their friend's house, Pam felt a bit anxious. They were in a new state with people they hadn't known for long, and her daughters were staying at a house where she wasn't very familiar with the residents. At 6 o'clock in the morning, Pam received a call as she was preparing to move from Kansas to Texas. The phone rang, and at such an early hour, Pam immediately wondered who was calling and why. It's the Val Verde emergency room asking Pam for permission to go to Life Flight Krystal. She was attacked, and Pam said, "Absolutely. Life Flight her. Where?" And they said, "San Antonio." That Pam doesn't know anything except that Krystal's throat was slit. When I got in her room, I saw this little girl with all of these tubes, and one of the machines was breathing for her. She looked like this baby in this humongous bed, and I looked her in her eyes and I said, "Are you okay, Angel? Mommy's here." I knew that a guy had slit her windpipe and nicked her vocal cords, and then she kept asking me, "Is Katie okay? Is Katie okay?" And I couldn't tell her anything. Krystal's mother recounted, Johnny Allen, Texas Ranger, received the phone call about half an hour before Pam did. He was informed about a violent attack at the Harris family's home. He knew right away that this was a very serious situation involving children and immediately jumped into his car to head to the scene. Johnny Allen received a phone call regarding this attack and murder at 5:30 a.m. on December 31st, 1999, 30 minutes before Pam Surles. When he entered the crime scene, which was identified as the Harris residence, there was a bedroom that he learned had 2 young girls sleeping in it. On the floor was a deceased young girl. The crime scene was extremely bloody. The murder victim was identified as 13-year-old Kayleen Harris, who normally went by Katie. Katie Harris was a very popular 13-year-old beautiful young girl who had everything in the world going for her, well liked by her fellow students, a young girl who fought very bravely for her life. She had befriended Krystal, age 10, and her little sister Mark, who had recently moved to the area. Within their group, they had a sleepover at her house on the night of the attack. They laughed, shared secrets, and created beautiful memories within the cozy walls of their home. But now, the corners of the rooms they once shared together seemed darker and more ominous than ever before. They could never have imagined that they wouldn't be safe in their own home where they felt the safest and most peaceful. Krystal's younger sister, Mark Surles, was 7 years old at the time, and her sister Krystal was 10. In my eyes, my sister Krystal seemed somewhat aloof, and there was quite an age gap between us, and we didn't really get along that well. However, even though sisters often quarrel and make up, they always protect each other. They stayed at the Harris family's house, which was a big family. Oldest son, Sean. Then there's Justin, Lori, and Katie. They lived kind of out in the desert, like there wasn't a lot of people close to them. It was off in the middle of nowhere, or at least they thought so. Like many other this dinner included various fun activities, from makeup sessions to watching movies and eating popcorn. The dinner was nothing out of the ordinary. The girls enjoyed each other's company, laughing and playing throughout the night. But what they didn't know, and no one could have known at the time, was that this dinner would turn into a tragedy for the 2 families. Katie and Krystal stayed up late and slept in the same room. At first, Krystal's younger sister wanted to sleep with Krystal and Katie, and she decided to sleep on the floor next to the bed. However, they didn't want Mark Surles there, and she was forced to leave. But that turned out to be lucky for her, because last night was a horrific one. When I couldn't sleep in the room, I was so mad, and I remember I just laid in bed for like 2 hours just fuming. I was just so mad, I wanted to be in that room. I woke up to the sun coming through the window, and I sat up and I saw a lady standing in my room that I didn't know, and she just handed me a pair of shorts and a purple tank top and said, "Put this on. We gotta go." Directly, maybe 5 steps away from my door, was just a stream of blood. It looked like somebody was stumbling, was holding on to things. There was blood on the wall, and it was everywhere. And then there was more outside. I just remember seeing it all the way down the front steps and just off into the street. I knew somebody was hurt. I saw the blood. I could see everybody crying. Everybody was frantic. I just wanted to know what was going on. Krystal's sister shares, that day they went to bed a bit late, but in her memory, Krystal remembers waking up like she wanted to scream. Krystal lay on the top bed and only raised her head a little, and Krystal was looking around. Krystal never sat up completely or anything, but the lights were still on so she could see everything, every move of this scary man. He had scruffy hair, long, dark, curly hair, and a big, scary, long, bushy beard that, just took over his whole face. And then his eyes were just dark and mean. Krystal witnessed the entire incident and all of the killer's actions. He still didn't realize Krystal was in the room, and he was preparing to leave. He opened the door, almost ready to turn out the lights, took one last look, and he saw Krystal looking at him. I was trying to crawl to the right side of the bed because he was on the left. He just walked up and slit Krystal's throat. Without hesitation, Krystal pretended to be dead and fell to the floor, silently praying that he wouldn't come back to check if she was still alive or not. And then, I just remember laying there and the light turning off and I heard the door shut, and so I got on my hands and knees and I was crawling across the floor in the bedroom. And I came across Katie on the floor. She was kind of making a gasping noise, or maybe she was choking. But then I was trying to comfort her. I laid next to her, rubbing her back, and that's when I realized I couldn't talk, because all I wanted to say was, everything's gonna be okay, everything's gonna be okay. And then Kate was silent. She gradually passed away in Krystal's arms. But I couldn't. And then, as soon as she stopped making those noises, I had this feeling, get out of here, get up, come on, go, don't lay here, go. Krystal wondered if the murderer knew the whole family was still here. Everyone alive or dead, she decided to run out. And when she heard the sound of the engine running away, she rushed out into the night to look for help. It was dark outside. I was in my pajamas, no shoes, nothing. And I just decided, I saw a light in the distance. I was like, that's my goal. That's where I need to be. I just got on the road and walked really slow to that light. Really, all I could think about was just get to this house, just get to this house, just get to this house. And I just banged on their door, and I hear a gentleman. He's like, who's there? Who's there? I can't, and I can't talk. So I'm just banging as hard as I can on the door, and then he opens the door. The elderly neighbor, Herb Betts, had been awake for some time, watching a New Year's program from Australia when he heard a knock on the door. Peeking through the door crack, he was startled to see young Krystal standing there in her blood-stained nightclothes. The girl couldn't speak, just stared at me pleadingly, the neighbor said. That kind man helped Krystal call 911. Mr. Betts opened the door, allowing Krystal to sit on the chair, and called the police. He tried to staunch the blood from the wound on Krystal's neck, comforting her before handing her a piece of paper. Krystal attempted to write 3 short lines before slumping back into the chair, and she wrote, "Will I live?" The ambulance arrived quickly, finding Krystal in shock, experiencing severe convulsions. She was rushed to Del Rio Hospital for initial treatment before being transferred by helicopter to another hospital in San Antonio for immediate surgery. I thought the girl wouldn't make it and would die right in my house. It's horrifying, Mr. Betts told the police. The police arrived at the Harry's residence, finding Katie dead from excessive bleeding. She had a total of 16 stab wounds. The surgery was successful, and Krystal miraculously pulled through, waking up the very next day, the first day of the new year, with a bandage around her neck. The investigators were present, debating whether to interview Krystal immediately, when she signaled for pen and paper and began recounting the events that had transpired. Krystal even sketched a portrait of the assailant who had attacked her that day. He was a round-faced man with a beard, wearing a baseball cap and long brown hair. They entered Krystal's room and woke her up, and they explained to Krystal. Johnny Allen said to her, "We have a lineup, and if you see the man in that mansion who did this to all of you, put your finger on him." Krystal held the lineup of photos and she began. You could see her eyes shifting from one photo to another, and then you could see her turn back and focus on one photo. And I stood beside her as she did this, and Krystal placed her right index finger on the photo of Tommy Lynn Sells. Tommy Lynn Sells, at that time, had become our #1 suspect. Specialist Shirley Timmons worked directly with Krystal at her bedside to refine the depiction of the perpetrator based on her testimony. The portrait sketch was promptly delivered to the Harry's residence for identification by family members. Krystal couldn't shake the image from her mind, and what surprised her was how accurately they had depicted it compared to his actual appearance at the time. It was too perfect. Once they received identification from Krystal, they turned around and headed back toward Del Rio, which is a 2.5-hour drive from San Antonio. The Val Verde County Sheriff's Office had handled Tommy Lynn Sells before on some accusations that were made there in Del Rio against him. When they got to Tommy Lynn Sells' residence, it was approximately 5:30 in the morning. They knocked on the door. It was opened. They went right on in and were met near the front doorway by Tommy Lynn Sells. His comment was, "I'm glad I finally got caught. I was tired of doing this." And then they told him he was under arrest for murder. When Tommy Lynn Sells was brought to the Val Verde County Sheriff's Office, he was willing to cooperate with police. Confessions were obtained from him as well as his consent to go over the crime scene. He confessed everything he did, and it was truly terrifying. Johnny Allen believes the motive for this murder and the attack on Krystal was sexual assault. They discovered that Sells was friends with the Harris family, and they feel like he specifically targeted Katie. It's frightening that Sells had also made a comment that he actually thought about killing the 6 people that were in the trailer. And what surprised people was that when he returned to the police station, he confessed everything he had done in the past and how many people he had killed. Tommy Lynn Sells was born on June 28, 1964, was one of America's worst serial killers. He killed men, women, little boys, and girls alike. Tommy's crimes are terrifying. He often gained entrance to a home through a window. He seemed to enjoy murdering mothers and their children, but he's known to have ended complete families too. Some of these victims were prostitutes. Others he killed in drug deals gone bad. A few were trying to help him. One was a mom who pissed him off in passing, so he followed her home to exact his revenge. Tommy has 22 confirmed kills, though it's believed his true body count is higher than 70. He was a drifter who usually left town before his crimes were even known, so he got away with killing for decades. Tommy had a terrible upbringing. His mother's top priority was not her several children, Nina. His mother was more concerned with her own happiness. At 18 months of age, Tommy and his twin sister, Tammy Jean, came down with meningitis. Tammy did not survive. At around 2 years old, Nina gave her son up, sent him to be raised by his Aunt Bonnie. After raising the boy for 3 years, Bonnie decided to adopt him. Nina would not allow this. Tommy was forced to move back home. He didn't have a steady father figure, so when a man named Willis Clark took interest in her child, Nina saw no problem with it. He called this man father. Tommy Lynn Sells said that his dad told him a long time ago, "Dead men tell no tales." He still remembers that to this day. Tommy spent many nights at this man's house, a man who was later convicted of pedophilia. Tommy was abusing alcohol at age 7. His mother abandoned him at 13, and at 16 he had already committed murder. He was arrested multiple times in between killings for petty crimes such as car theft, drugs, public drunkenness, etc., but was always released to kill again. Tommy traveled around by stolen cars, hitchhiking, or hopping trains. He survived by taking any sort of work he could get. In July of 1985, Tommy was working with a carnival. This is how he met 35-YO Ina Court. She was at the fair with her little boy Rory. Ina asked the Tommy to come back to her place for the night. Tommy obliged. Before the sun came up, Tommy had beaten Ina to death with a baseball bat and 4-YO Rory too. Jan of 88. Keith Dardine was a family man who tried to help Tommy, gave him a ride, and brought him home for supper. No good deed goes unpunished. Tommy murdered the man, then turned his attention on Keith's family. He beat 3-year-old Pete to death with a hammer, then sexually assaulted Keith's wife, Elaine. The poor woman was pregnant, and the trauma put her into labor. When the baby was born, Tommy beat both mother and newborn to death with a baseball bat, then assaulted Elaine one last time with his bat. In May of '92, Tommy was arrested for the attack of a 20-YO woman named Fabienne Witherspoon. Fabienne was a good person who wanted to help a hungry homeless man. Tommy had been carrying a sign, begging for food. For her kindness, she was stabbed 18 times, beaten, and raped repeatedly. She survived and testified against her attacker in court. Tommy claimed that the sex was consensual and the attack was self-defense. Fabienne would later say how awful it was that she was treated like scum in court, the victim blaming what she endured after fighting for her life. Little did the court know that Fabienne had survived a serial killer. Tommy served just 5 years for what he did to this young woman, and within months he was killing again. Julie Harper had argued with Tommy at a gas station on October 13, 1997. The killer followed her home, entered her house in the middle of the night, and killed Julie's 10-year-old son. Joel Kirkpatrick was stabbed to death as he lay sleeping in bed. If this wasn't tragic enough, Julie was convicted of her child's murder and sentenced to 65 years. She was not released until Tommy confessed a couple years later. Can you imagine? The serial killer's final attack was on New Year's Eve 1999 in Del Rio, Texas. Krystal Surles, was just 10 YO when she and her 7 YO little sister went to a sleepover at 13 YO Katie Harris's house. The question is, why was this serial killer who escaped for 2 decades brought to light just because of a 10-year-old girl? Finally, the trial took place 9 months after the murder, and the headline here is that Krystal Surles, 11 years old, will be a crucial witness, the main witness for the prosecution. They knew it would be explosive. They knew it would be very emotional, especially for Krystal Surles, because she hadn't seen Tommy Lynn Sells since that night he came to the house and slit her throat, and she didn't know how she would react. Before entering the trial, Krystal was sent a ring with a cross. This ring belonged to a new friend. She had just gone through a similar experience as Krystal when she had to face the man who had murdered her. Intending to kill herself again, the ring seemed to give her strength at the trial.
Said, do you want to walk by him? You could either walk by him or just walk through this door and get on the stand. And I said, I want to walk by him.
Krystal was brave and told the truth. She did all this for her deceased friend Katie. This is for Katie. She deserves this. Each of her testimonies was a step on a path filled with fear and anxiety, each step treading on emotional wounds that seemed never to heal. He, who had ruthlessly slit Katie's throat, was now advancing towards her with a sharp knife in hand. Fear sliced through her mind, prompting her to plead weakly with him. I will be quiet. I promise I won't say anything. I'm not making any noise. It's Katie here. When he coldly ordered her to move her hand, she, in a state of fear and desperation, raised her hands to protect her neck where Katie had just been injured moments before. The only thought in her mind was the fear of becoming the next victim. As the terrifying confrontation continued, she found some comfort in the gift that Christy had given her. It was a reminder of friendship and courage, helping her to try to stay calm. Later, when he made a horrific stab at her neck, she lay still, very quietly, pretending to be dead. She knew that if he realized she was still alive, he would definitely come back and not let her survive. When she was informed that she could finish her testimony and leave the verification area, she felt relieved but still haunted. "Thank you, and you are forgiven," were the last words she heard, offering a glimmer of hope that perhaps, finally, she might find peace after so much pain. After only a few hours of deliberation, the jury quickly comes back with a unanimous verdict. They decided to give Tommy Lynn Sells the death penalty. After Krystal walked out of the stands, she felt strong and victorious when serial killer Tommy Lynn Sells was sentenced to death thanks to her testimony. Krystal survived the brutality of Tommy Lynn Sells and gradually found solace with family and new friends. She always remembers her best friend, Katie, with gratitude and pride for what they overcame. Krystal is a living testament to resilience and hope in the face of terror, believing that Katie's spirit is still with her, supporting her. Sells was housed on death row in the Allen B. Polunsky unit near Livingston, Texas. According to multiple sources, Sells was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas on April 3, 2014, at the age of 49. His last meal consisted of 3 peanut butter sandwiches, oatmeal cookies, and milk. He did not leave any final remarks. As the drug began flowing into his arms inside the death chamber in Huntsville, Sells took a few breaths, his eyes closed, and he began to snore. After less than a minute, he stopped moving. He was pronounced dead at 6:27 p.m. CDT, 13 minutes after being given the pentobarbital. "My sister didn't get the constitutional pain and suffering," said Sean Harris, the victim's brother, adding that Sells' punishment was pretty easy compared to what his siblings suffered, being stabbed 16 times and having her neck repeatedly slit. His death was also gentle and painless. His sins could never be compensated for by that death. Weeks after the incident, Krystal Center was reunited with her younger sisters Mark, Left, and Amber. They all become closer than ever. 10 years after the incident, Krystal remains close with her younger sisters, Mark, Left, and Amber. Here they pose for a photo in summer 2009. They say Krystal has been like a second mom to them. Krystal Surles, now 20 years old, lives in Idaho with her father, Mark. She is saving money to attend college. She says, "I feel lucky and happy to be here, and my life has truly turned a new leaf."